The ongoing full-scale invasion of Ukraine has shown that involving civilians in hostilities is easier than ever. Both Ukraine and the Russian Federation have taken advantage of the growing digitalization of our societies to support offensive war efforts, report on military movements using smartphone apps, or involve private civilian companies in the resilience of cyber infrastructure. This civilianization of the conflict comes with harmful implications for populations engaging in cyberspace. They operate alongside an obscure nexus of state and non-state actors with complex allegiances, motivations, objectives, and tactics. In this mini-series, we'll walk you through the cyber conflict between Ukraine and the Russian Federation and how it affects people and communities. This first episode sets the stage by clarifying who actually engages in cyber hostilities. Of course, the armed forces of nation-states play a key role in cyberspace. On February 24, 2022, as Russian Federation troops marched into Ukraine, a sophisticated cyber attack incapacitated the broadband satellite internet access used by Ukrainian military command and control. While the origin of a cyber attack is hard to pinpoint with certainty, this specific attack has been attributed by several sources to the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation. In addition to attacks carried out by state agencies, threat groups benefit from the support of a complex network of actors. The landscape of these threat groups, often referred to as advanced persistent threat actors, is constantly evolving. They frequently target governmental entities, civil society actors like NGOs, but also critical infrastructure like the energy sector, education, the media, or financial services, which all have heavy implications for populations. For instance, on January 13, 2022, the APT actor Dev0586 conducted data wiping attacks, deleting or corrupting data on a range of networks in the energy, financial, ICT, and public administration sectors. Externalizing these operations allow nation-states to increase the volume of attacks carried out, keep some distance from the attack, and maintain plausible deniability when the attack is attributed. The behavior of nation-state actors is anchored in their military doctrine and foreign policy strategies. For example, the Russian doctrine revolves around hybrid warfare. It involves going beyond the traditional Western concept of cybersecurity and encompasses a psychological and cognitive dimension in order to control or influence the information space to achieve strategic goals. It includes non-military measures such as subversive, economic, informational, and diplomatic means, in addition to or as a replacement for the use of military force. This action may blur the boundaries between war and peace as it does not trigger red lines of confrontation or escalation to conventional war. The main pro-Ukraine state actors include GORMO, the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and the IT Army of Ukraine, which was initiated in 2022, further to an appeal for cyber volunteers from the Ministry of Digital Transformation. As the main cyber volunteer army, reportedly coordinating its efforts via a Telegram channel, the status of the Army of Ukraine is hard to pinpoint. The movement seems to conduct a range of offensive operations, from coordinated DDoS attacks against Russian infrastructure to more complex cyber operations against more specific Russian targets. But nation-state actors and APT groups only account for a portion of the total volume of non-military incidents. Another portion of attacks comes from cybercriminals. Cybercriminals are financially motivated groups conducting individual and collective actions through the use of malicious cyber activities. The intent and the way they conduct cyber operations differ from one group to another. For example, in April 2023, the threat actor UAC6 initiated a phishing email campaign against a Ukrainian government agency, infecting nearly 1,100 computers. But this still does not give a complete picture of threat actors. So where do cyber attacks come from? To understand the most active source of attacks on infrastructure essential for the survival of civilian populations, we have to highlight the role of collectives. Hacktivist collectives account in volume for most of the incidents documented since January 2022. Hacktivist collectives are politically, socially, or ideologically motivated groups conducting individual and collective actions through the use of malicious cyber activities. Some follow a centralized structure and have a clear leader, like Killnet, while others are more decentralized, like the Anonymous Collective. As opposed to the sophisticated activity of state-sponsored actors, hacktivist collectives conduct more basic attacks and instead focus on disruptive effects. For instance, while state-sponsored operations hit Ukraine during the invasion period, collectives have contributed by conducting DDoS attacks, Since then, the hacktivism landscape has evolved into increasingly organized, structured, and resilient communities. They have caught the attention of nation-states, which seem increasingly open to engaging these civilian IT volunteers. For the Russian Federation, one of the most active hacktivist collectives is the Killnet Group. It has claimed hundreds of attacks across sectors, including against hospitals in the US, the European Parliament, or even Eurovision during Ukraine's performance. For Ukraine, the anonymous collective is, to this day, the most active hacktivist collective. After tweeting the beginning of its cyber war against Russia on February 24th, the collective has claimed credit for dozens of cyber incidents targeting the Russian Federation, including hack and leak operations, DDoS, and defacement attacks. But here's the problem. Hacktivism and the direct participation of civilians in cyber attacks raises concern and challenges. During an international armed conflict, parties are bound by international humanitarian law, which regulates the conduct of war and protects persons not or no longer participating in the hostilities. More specifically, the principle of distinction separates civilians from combatants and civilian objects from military objectives. But neither of these designations is set in stone. First, a civilian object can become a military objective. For example, a house or a bridge tactically used by the defender might be targeted by an attacker. And the same applies to civilians themselves. Article 51, paragraph 3 of the Geneva Convention states that civilians are only protected unless and for such time as they take a direct part in hostilities. The involvement of volunteers and groups carrying out cyber attacks may be perceived as directly participating in hostilities and blurs the line between civilians and combatants and civilian and military objects. They may lose their protection as civilians under international humanitarian law, exposing them to cyber and/or kinetic violence and to legal prosecutions for violations of the law. Beyond raising legal challenges and exposing civilians to the risk of harm, the involvement of civilians, the civilianization of the conflict, further destabilizes cyberspace. First, by increasing the accessibility of harmful and sophisticated malware. The diffusion of ready-to-use cyber tools accessible online, leaked, or sold lowers the barriers of entry for malicious actors. These risks have recently materialized with the growing popularity of online forums. These online platforms facilitate access to a range of educational materials for conducting malicious cyber activities, including DDoS attacks and social engineering. Forums are usually managed by hacktivist collectives and pose significant challenges to stability in cyberspace. In addition to these hacktivist forums, another danger lies in the manipulation of open source technologies, such as the use of protestware. Protestware are actual software applications, code libraries, or application packages that have been manipulated by their legitimate developer to convey a political message. This has consequences for the people and businesses who rely on the code. The effects can be displaying a message or an image, but can also be erasing user data or embedding malware. More generally, this civilianization poses risks to individuals globally. The challenge of having loosely organized groups is that they might lack proper coordination, training, and rules of engagement. As a result, they can cause damage via second and third order consequences of attacks they're engaging in. Where the civilian population is required or encouraged to report via apps and smartphones on the movement and weaponry of enemy forces, civilians become part of a landscape normally occupied by the military, and this can expose them to retaliation if caught. It also complicates attribution and allows nation-state actors to maintain plausible deniability and escape accountability for the harm caused to people using cyber attacks. As we've outlined in this first episode, knowing who fights in cyberspace matters. Not only because it shows the challenges to current legal frameworks, but also because it harms people and communities. Let's take this one step further. Now that we've established who actually fights in cyberspace, our second episode focuses on what these actors do and how they harm communities. As we walk you through the conflict phase by phase, we will share our data-driven understanding of how today's threat actors harm and impact their targets from thousands of miles away, and the links with what happens on the ground. You can also dive directly into the data that make these videos possible. Our team of threat intelligence analysts distills actionable insights on an up-to-date interactive platform, which also provides details of law and policy related to international armed conflict. You can access all of this via the description of this video. Whether you are a policymaker, a researcher, a student, or simply curious about the role played by cyber and hybrid threats in the conflict and their impact on people and communities, our platform can answer your most pressing questions. In addition, we gather recent developments in quarterly analysis reports that you can also access through the platform. Finally, if you find this content interesting, share it with your community and leave your questions or impressions below. We'll see you in episode 2.